Please welcome the director of the GMF Cities program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, Mr. Stephen Bosacker.
Welcome back to all of you. I'm pleased to introduce the next block of sessions that are going to be devoted to ways that local players are building resilience and democracy and fortifying it through actions in their cities and communities. The first conversation will examine what authority local governments can use to set an example of democratic strength. The second will explore the lack of trust around elections today and what different sectors, political, media, and civil society, can do to build trust and faith in electoral systems. You know, I see cities and democracy a bit like, and I think that at this point in the forum you're ready for a lighter metaphor, peanut butter and jelly. Been around since we were kids, and way beyond that. One can even wax a bit nostalgic about the combination and the way they complement each other. And both are good alone, yet somehow better together. Really, though, cities and democracy are inextricably linked. Not really an optional mashup like a PB&J sandwich. Democracy, after all, was birthed in a city. And you may have heard me say it before, but I believe cities will save it. In this moment, when we can read 2 or 3 op-eds a week about the demise of, or backsliding, or even the death of democracy, cities have been innovating on ways to be transparent, to undo divisions, and be inclusive of migrants and refugees, and build dynamic places because of that inclusion, and use metrics to show results and competent governing that strengthen the very foundations of democracy where it happens, on the ground, in the daily life of residents. A year ago, GMF Cities launched a project called Cities Fortifying Democracy. 5-person teams from 6 European cities and 6 US cities came together to compare ideas and actions they take to strengthen where democracy seems weak or at risk. Here is a short video of some of the mayors participating in this important project who share their views about the intention we must bring to this effort and the challenging work to be done.
An effective, vibrant democracy looks like one in which the city creates a space where community feels they can participate and engage with the city.
Democracy thrives not only on election day, but every day in between. Constituent emailing, calling, and engaging their public and city officials ensures that voices are continuing to be heard.
The biggest challenge we face is to get people, especially the young, involved in public debate and decision making. All too often, citizens concede that their voice would not matter, that the authorities wouldn't hear what they say, that the whole exercise is a waste of time. We should counter the apathy and show people that their individual choices add up to a joint decision tangibly impacting reality.
You have total apathy, then your democracy is probably going to die. But your democracy is also going to die if no one's willing to compromise. You know, if everybody's just got their views and they're wedded to it and they become extreme in the way that they promulgate their views, you're also still not going to have the pluralistic society that a democracy depends on.
At the same time, public participation is an excellent self-education compromise. People learn that compromises are necessary to get things done.
The biggest challenge we face in strengthening our democracy is general distrust in government being at an all-time high. People don't feel heard by their representatives.
We are trying to work towards the same goal, a goal for quality of life for everyone. We try to do this by working with people to understand our values.
It's because of its people. It's people who keep the city feeling fresh and dynamic, who surprise us every day with their zest for life, despite all adversities that they may be forced to face. We always try to find new ways to open up the decision-making process and be more responsive to citizens' needs.
So we meet community where they are at, in spaces and places that are comfortable to them.
We are
striving to be
engaged,
equitable,
competent,
transparent,
courageous,
innovative,
compassionate,
inclusive,
responsive,
just,
trustworthy,
free.
We are cities fortifying democracy.
It's a good video.
Please welcome the Executive Vice President and Senior Advisor at the Bertelsmann Foundation, Ms. Clover Ashbrook.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning if you're watching abroad, perhaps good evening. Cities, they're the seismographs of our global challenges, but they're also the incubators of our global solutions. By 2030, 68% of us will be living in cities. And density and contraction of people, yes, they create problems. That creates problems. It expands and it expounds on the challenges we have. But cities have also taken this opportunity to rethink and re-seize their own form of power, of finding networks with like-minded other cities to address issues as diverse as climate change, pandemics, migration, refugees, and they have a new form of power. Not only the economic linkages that, of course, connect cities across the globe to one another, and increasingly the resilient way in which they're tackling what we're seeing just a few thousand kilometers here as urban warfare and terrorism, but they also, as we just heard in this video, have the power of credibility, trust, and understanding. So cities are a force to be reckoned with, not just among themselves, but also in international relations and in the undergirding of our very understanding of civic fabric. So I'm thrilled to welcome to the stage the mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski. Rafał and I sat together at the Munich Security Conference in February, where we were just a few days out, as it turns out, from, I think, what has become really a cataclysmic turning point for world order, for the way that the West looks into the world, whether it's liberal democracies or democracies writ large. And Rafał, I have to start there. We have to start there, because Stephen made a mention of it, and we're sitting in this agora. Cities used to be the final end, the prize of war. And now this audience and the audience around the globe is as familiar with Ukrainian cities as anybody could be. Severodonetsk, Mariupol, Kharkiv, we all know their names because this is where the battle for our future is being fought. So as the mayor of a country and a city that has welcomed so many Ukrainian refugees, I wanted you to respond to a quote that President Zelensky made in front of the Czech parliament, where he said, Russia's not interested only in our cities of Mariupol, Severodonetsk, Kharkiv, and Kiev. No, its ambitions are directed on a vast area from Warsaw to Sofia. What is your reaction when you hear that? How are you reading this from the perspective of City Hall?
Well, I mean, President Zelensky is absolutely right. And we've been telling that to our friends in Western Europe for years, that Putin is a bully, that this is a guy who's completely unpredictable, and then he wants to reconstruct the Soviet Empire. So I have to tell you that we were listening to what he was to say in Munich before the war. 5 days before the war, I was in Kiev talking to my friend Vitaly Klitschko. And we all knew that something's going to happen. We all knew that probably a war will erupt. We thought that it would be another hybrid warfare. We didn't expect an all-out war, but we knew that something was brewing, and we were preparing for it.
How were you preparing for it? As the city of Warsaw, in your conversations with Vitaly Klitschko, how were you thinking about, even then, resilience?
Well, you need to remember that we have our own historical memories. Warsaw was, you've just seen, pictures of my beautiful city, but it was destroyed. It was razed to the ground because one maniac decided to wipe it off the maps of history, Adolf Hitler. And so when we see Kharkiv, Kiev, and other cities, by the way, both of them are our sister cities, we know what it means when a maniac decides to wipe your city off the map. And immediately after we got the signals that the situation is getting worse, we decided to do whatever we could in order to prepare ourselves for a big influx of refugees. We were helping in 2014. And this time we had a crisis meeting 2 days before the war. So when the war actually erupted, in a day we were able to set up reception centers at 2 railway stations. We were basically ready to respond to the most immediate brothers and sisters from Ukraine.
If President Zelensky is right, and what you as a mayor have a responsibility for is to prepare the residents of your city to think about their own resilience. NATO is about to meet. There's a dinner that kicks off the Madrid summit. But in 2013 was the first time that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization began to think about urban warfare, and that NATO troops would have to operate in an urban context more than anything else. And of course, they were thinking much further afield. They were thinking maybe more of cities like Aleppo. And suddenly, these things are much closer. So how are you thinking now about not only the democratic resilience? I mean, how do you talk to your population? How do you inform them? How do you think about what new threats are for your city? But also, how do you think about how that relates to other institutions that otherwise would be in that security fold?
Well, we feel secure, so I mean there is no reason to panic, and that's what we are telling our inhabitants, because we are in a NATO, and that's one of the greatest security linchpins of Europe and the transatlantic sphere. And not only that, because of course, President Biden was in Warsaw. I had an honor to show him around. But just same week, Google decided to invest $1 billion in Warsaw. So I mean, all the signs are there that we're stable when it comes to an all-out war. But when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to different hybrid threats, you never know. And that's why we're talking about it with the inhabitants of our city. Just guys, 3 weeks ago, I received a phone call from Vitaly Klitschko. He wanted to talk. We've organized a Zoom with him, Everything seemed fine, although normally we speak Russian. Then I switched into English because I wanted to explain things, and he switched, he wanted translation, which was a bit bizarre. He started asking bizarre questions, but everything was kind of normal. Fine, okay. It was a deep fake. He did it with Madrid. They did it with
Berlin.
Madrid. They did it with Berlin. They did it with Budapest, and so on and so forth. So I mean, that's what we're dealing with, when it comes. So even when we feel stable, when it comes to actually an all-out conventional warfare, we have to be very careful when it comes to other aspects of security. I mean, guys. 2004, 2009, I was working in the European Parliament, then I was a member of the European Parliament, and we were telling our friends in Europe, guys, we got to do something about energy security. We need to become more resilient, more independent, and they were telling me, you're obsessed with Russia. I mean, we do business with Russia. They are normal guys. Why should we do something about it? We don't want to hurt them. Like, competition policy against Gazprom. No, don't you ever touch that. Nord Stream. Remember these debates? I mean, and I could go on and on and on and on and on. And because we were pushing the European Union for it, now we are much more ready to actually withstand the pressure and energy being used as a weapon. We were saying to our friends in Germany and in France, guys, we need to buy gas together as the European Union, and said, no way, because we've got preferential treatment. So in a sense, this is a bitter pill to swallow that we were right, but we were doing it. On cyber, I was a minister of digitization. Mm-hmm. There was this directive, no one probably remembers it and knows about it outside of specialists, about network security. And I was a minister, I was traveling around, I was in the Council of the European Union trying to convince my friends that we need it. And they were saying, no, come on, the Brits told me we were silent, we've got this wonderful relation with the US. The French told me, we are not going to share that information with anyone else. And guess what? 4 years later, because of the disinformation that the Russians use, we finally did it in the European Union. So we have the tools, but we still have to work on that and strengthen our resilience.
So in a way, it's a backhanded compliment to the functionality and power of cities that these turns out hoaxers who are working, potentially with a deep fake, potentially just with an actor from these Klitschko calls, that they would target cities because cities still remain that bastion of trust, that bastion of understanding. I mean, everywhere across the world, whether you look at the NED surveys, the IDEA surveys, democracy is backsliding and is backsliding over decades. The only place where it seems to still reside is in that direct contact, in the urban sphere in that way. What do you feel, what are those key ingredients of urban power that you've alluded to a couple of things that even on cyber and on things that used to be attributed to the nation state control, cities are taking back some version of it or taking it for themselves, maybe not back, but are renegotiating their relationship with the nation state such that they can better serve their citizens. So what constitutes urban power?
I would submit to you that we do not renegotiate anything. I would submit to you that sometimes simply the nation state doesn't do its job. I mean, look at what's happening now with the refugees. I mean, the central government in Poland, the populist, they're still the same populist government, guys. Don't get misled, Okay, once we establish that, so they did their job on the border. But then, it was the civil society in action, it was a non-governmental organization, and it was us who had to come in and actually organize help. There was no strategy in Poland when it comes to, for example, education. I have 60,000, 70,000 additional kids in Warsaw. We've enrolled 20,000 of them already to our schools. And the government doesn't have any strategy, so we just need to come in and fill the void. And it's the same when it comes to climate action. Again, this government is not very keen on fighting climate change. I don't know whether you know it. The populist government in Poland, they simply say it's not a problem and that we should go on as nothing happened. So again, we need to step in because otherwise, we are not going to realize common priorities together. Anything now, I mean, it's impossible to talk about high politics, low politics, what's, urban responsibility, what's not, because at the end of the day, the people on the streets, and that's the big difference. We walk the streets every day. So we get stopped, we get into conversations and so on and so forth, and people don't care. I mean, if the government's not there, they expect your mayor to be there and help them out. And it's whatever you touch. If you talk about inequalities, if you talk about social policy, if you talk about hospitals, in COVID, our government didn't have any strategy. They were, telling me one day that I'm responsible for 11 hospitals, that I should just, one of those hospitals should be COVID hospitals. So we did it. In 2 weeks, they said, no. Each of your hospitals needs to have a COVID ward. So we were preparing each hospital with a COVID ward. And then we're changing this opinion every other day. And we just had to cope. Because at the end of the day, we are responsible.
And then worse than that, wasn't it that the government was effectively trying to starve you out when it came to PPE and the kind of materials? And wasn't it there, and I wonder if you could share with this audience a little bit, how you used an urban network that you had built for yourself of course, European cities in, let's say, illiberal and sliding toward illiberal democracies within the European Union, that you bonded together to find the kind of solutions to serve your population.
So I mean, the first thing I would submit to you that's happening everywhere. That cities step in where the central government is not coping well with the reality. The second question, that's our little Polish specificity and maybe Hungarian specificity, that the central government just hates our guts and we are enemy number one. So of course they're trying to starve us out of funds and prerogatives and so on and so forth. And we are trying to cope in many different ways. For example, I've been trying to convince my friends in the European Union that we need a bit of direct financing. Okay, so that money can go straight to the cities.
And is Brussels, since we are here, understanding that message? How receptive
are they? It takes time to convince our friends, but yeah, I think that especially now with the refugee situation, they're seeing it. And for example, we have this great initiative of 100 green cities, which opens the door for certain direct financing to actually fight climate change. Now, when the European Union is trying to get some additional funding for refugees, by the way, in Warsaw, I've seen American money, I've seen Taiwanese money, I haven't seen any European money yet. And by the way, I spend most of my time doing European integration, so I'm enthusiastically European. And of course, we're trying to convince them. They say, yeah, 30% of the money should go to local governments. So at least, and of course, there are also milestones now with the Recovery Fund for Poland, where democracy and rule of law has to be in place, but also, fortunately, the money has to be spent according to transparent criteria. So we're doing as much as we can. But, and that's responding to your question very briefly, we've also done this network of cities. As you know, the Pact of Free Cities with Budapest, it started with Budapest, Bratislava, and Prague, but it has enlarged. Now Brussels, Paris, London are there. So we're using these networks to help each other. So for example, our government didn't want any relocation scheme during the refugee crisis, because that's what they are. You know, their strategy is to have no strategy. So we were at least calling our friends in different cities, and they were helping us out. So it's, you know, we have different networks, Eurocities, the Committee of the Regions, C40, and the Pact of the Free Cities. We're trying to benchmark, we're trying to collaborate, and of course that facilitates our life.
And now I understand a new compact that's co-sponsored by GMF.
Indeed, and I'm very happy that we've done that on security. That's so many cities, 51. We need Zagreb, because Warsaw is the last one. I don't want to be the last one, because it's alphabetic. So we need Zagreb or another city with Zadar. Good Croatian name, Zara in Italian. So anyway, we need some Z cities to join us, but that's another initiative to help us out to create this network, also connected to our American friends, in order to be more resilient when it comes to security. I'm very happy that it has happened and it has been signed.
But if you can give us the top 3 issues that mayors should think about vis-a-vis the national sphere. We just 5 minutes ago, the G7 just issued their declaration on cities, and it sounds yet again a little paternalistic, in my opinion, where the nation state directs the city to be resilient and sustainable.
We've heard
what is
it all.
the city response to
We've
that?
heard it all. I mean, it's just, you know, I mean, the difference is, and it's not only Poland and Hungary, believe you me. I mean, you know, the cities in general are looking into the future, are much more progressive, are much more in sync with what people want. And at the end of the day, it just comes to the same basic baseline. I mean, you know, if you're a prime minister or if you're a minister and you say that, you know, global warming is not happening, and you're just zooming through the city in your limousine, no one's going to, you know, hold you accountable immediately. If I were to say such rubbish, I'd be confronted on the street of my city in an hour by the, you know, angry young people, and my daughter and my son. So I mean, we can't do that. So that's why, I mean, anything that you touch, I mean, besides, you know, of course, you know, hardcore security issues, defense issues, and so on and so forth, but almost anything else we need to be doing. And sometimes it's very difficult to say, you know, where our prerogatives end and where do they begin, because if there's a void, like there was in COVID, and it's not only Poland. I mean, you know, I've talked to my American friends. They had, you know, quite a lot of problems with the previous president of the United States, because the thing is that when I was talking to our American friends 6 years ago, and I was telling them, listen, we've got problems with democracy. They were saying, yeah, you know, this barbarian from the East, what does he know? 3 years ago, they changed their mind, and after the attack on the Capitol, now they're nodding their heads. You know, they understand what we're talking about, and they understand that cities have a role in strengthening democracy vis-a-vis the government, which not always is sane enough to actually acknowledge that we have challenges to meet.
So you've put your finger on this, and we're already nearing the end. So if you have a burning question on your mind, now would be the time to give me a 2-finger. Oh, right behind me, of course, the most challenging of question locations.
Blind spot.
I will get exactly the blind spot. So I'll get to you in a minute and a half. But you've just put your finger on it. If it is true, let's accept the proposition that cities are the beacon of democracy. They're coming out with unique issues and ways to respond to their citizen needs, but beyond that, the breaking point between the city and the urban, and you've mentioned the United States, and Jonathan Rodden has a wonderful book that's called Why Cities Lose, because that entire constitutional system is set up so that the rural areas rule the cities, and we're going to see this play out in November, and you see this in different ways in Europe. So how do cities, if that's in fact true, negotiate those divides? And if you look at the map of your own presidential race, it's the same thing, or the presidential race in Hungary. The cities are those enclaves of liberalism, but those are not the entire country. Something is wrong at the breakage point. What is that?
Well, it's tough. I mean, the important thing is to demonstrate solidarity, and that's what we do, because we have a redistribution mechanism in Poland whereby, you know, the big cities share their tax revenue with some of those rural areas, and that's really important. And at the end of the day, you know, when I go there, When I'm a presidential candidate or when I'm a member of my party, in my party hat, that's difficult. But when I go there as a mayor and I meet a mayor of a smaller city in some of the rural areas which are highly conservative, it's a completely different ballgame. Because people see that we have the same concerns and so on, and it's much easier to actually talk to people. That's why I submit to you that in countries like Poland, of course, we cannot win the elections with the crazy populists just by strengthening the parties, but we need to consolidate the local governance. That's what we do. We collaborate together so that if someone is attacked or if someone is being blackmailed by the government, we help them out. And we need to also galvanize the support of the young people. As we say in Polish, we need to play at the different pianos at the same time if you are to save democracy or strengthen it. And that's what we're doing.
We're clearly all going to have to become much better musicians. Go ahead.
My name is Samir and I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm asking this question also as a former refugee who fled the Bosnian War. We see in the media that some Polish politicians are very eager to accept refugees from Ukraine, whereas not refugees from African countries or the Middle East. What would be your response, and how can cities respond to this, what we would say as a systemic racism when it comes to current migrational issues? Thanks.
Dobar dan, hvala vam puno. The thing is that, I mean, there is a problem that of course, we cannot substitute the central government, and we cannot, I mean, if the government simply says no and closes the borders, we cannot open them as city. But, in Warsaw, we said we welcome everybody who needs help. And we do not make a distinction whether someone is from Ukraine with a Ukrainian passport or whether he's someone from a third country, because we had 8% of all the people coming from Ukraine were from different nationality. I was in a government, I was a minister of European integration where Poland agreed to actually accept migrants and refugees from the Mediterranean. And then the populist government came and they changed that decision. And don't get me into that, why they did it. I mean, populist and cynical. And they said that we agreed for 7,000 refugees. And they were saying that these are going to overrun us. And we had 7,000 refugees in the Ukrainian crisis crossing the border at the peak point every 15 minutes. So the thing is that the dealing with populists is very, very difficult. But at least in cities we can demonstrate that we're going to help anybody who needs help, regardless of where they come from or what kind of passport do they hold.
Proof of concept. Max Boucher. We have time for one more question after this, so
Thank you. I'm Max Boucher from Brookings in Washington, D.C. I think we often underestimate the pressure that local leaders face. Can you maybe describe the kind of political pressures that you and your peers receive from the national government, as you advance an agenda at the local level that increasingly clashes with national policy? Thank you.
Merci. The problem is that, the pressure is enormous because, of course, they want to starve us of funds. They want to take away our prerogatives. They're taking away our land. They're doing everything to make our life difficult. And on top of that, in a polarized world, political world that we live in today, it's very, very difficult because, I receive death threats every day. That's the reality. But at the end of the day, if you're serving the people, you can always win by simply delivering. Because at the end of the day, the people know better who's doing a good job and who's not. And at the end of the day, for example, in the refugee crisis, people knew that it was us, the mayors, who were much better prepared for what was coming than the central government. But it is a problem because everywhere in the world you have this tension between the central government and the local mayors and local governors and so on and so forth. But of course, in countries like Poland and in countries like Hungary, it has been weaponized by the central government because they're just destroying everything which is independent. They're destroying the independence of the courts, they're destroying the free media, and they're trying to destroy us. But guess what? They've been doing it for 7 years and we are still sitting.
We have time for one last question, also here in the front row for our microphone runners.
Hello, my name is Ciprian and I'm from Bucharest, so that we speak in cities. Cu piacere. So wind, much like climate change, doesn't stop at the border. What can cities do? What would you say to any mayor in Central and Eastern Europe? Top 3 things that he or she should do to eliminate, or at least to break a bit of the climate changes that we see, not just in our cities but also in our villages. Thank you.
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, if you are a mayor of a city like Warsaw, and if you're not directing and addressing the threat of global warming and fighting for cleaner air, fighting for climate and so on and so forth, you will be wiped off the electoral map. People will not vote for you, ever. You know, and that's one. But the most important, you know, I talk to some of those populists, you know, and they tell me, yeah, there's no global warming, you know, the father of our president of the republic, he's a professor of chemistry, and he is of very strong opinions that it's not really caused by humans and so on and so forth. Fine. So I tell them, listen, fine. I mean, we cannot quarrel about the global warming because you know, it gets us nowhere. Because I mean, you can say that you know the Earth is flat, and so what? But imagine this. I mean, if you are going to do what you're doing and not take the effort to fight climate change, that means that Poland will be reduced to a country with which no one does business, because the European Union will sooner or later adopt such rules, and it is adopting such rules, that you will be at a complete margin of European economy. So we need to do something about that. Even if you don't believe in global warming, you will be reduced to someone who is just at the margins. And I tell some of my councillors, because we do have councillors who also are doubting the role of the cities in fighting climate change, I tell them, okay, fine, okay, but there will be no money. I mean, no one will, the European Union, donors, and so on and so forth, no one will actually borrow us money if we do not accept the green agenda. So, I mean, as a mayor of the city, there's no other way, because first of all, we believe that this is the most important priority, and that's why we are fighting together in realize the priorities. And as I've said, you will be wiped off the map, and my daughter will, you know, lock my apartment, and I won't be able to enter it. But even if you don't believe in it, that would be the end of the development. And people just need to realize. So you just need to address these questions, and at the end of the day, and that's the last sentence I'm going to say, explain to the European Union, and that's what I'm doing. Guys, if you allow these guys to spend money without the cities and without the developed regions, that means that Poland and Hungary will never meet the common priorities of the European Union. So, do you want to have a dark hole in the middle of the continent? I mean, help us out.
I think what you've heard with an unbelievably passionate voice this afternoon is that it takes...
You told me we didn't have time, so I was,
recognition of power, the ability to negotiate on a multi-level environment and playing field, the idea that you have to deliver proof of concept and you have to be credible. And as the mayor of Warsaw would say, that is the way that hope lives forward in the cities.
I'll use that recording in my political campaign.
Join me in thanking Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And I hand over now